All right, thank you, Zohar. And now for the main event. Normally at like an SMPC meeting, Gene has about 20 minutes to talk. And if you've ever been to one of those talks, he's got about 60 slides. So I promised him today, of all days, when he's being honored and he's got a student as the chair of the situation. There goes Zohar's time. You're done, Zohar. So I promised Gene today that I would be a little loose with my timing. So we're going to let Gene speak today and get some theory to us. All right, Gene? Don't worry, we'll leave for lunch when we need to. So. Eugene Narmour.
Thank you very much. I was going to say something elegant, but I guess my response is gee whiz. I think, let me just say, the book was always directed to psychologists. I wrote it for them. The first book had a whole chapter devoted to hypotheses that might be examined, and my desire was that psychologists would think, here's a model that we can test, and it was designed that way. All the rules were formalized, not because I believe life is formalized, but when you make them numeric, you can test them, and that's part of the complexity of the book. It took me a very long time to write those rules. And they are incomplete. People have tried generating music from them, and they work and don't work. And the other thing is that when I wrote the theory, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood it was not carved in stone. And this is often missed in the theory, that although I use the word intervals, I really simply mean that human beings perceive things as being the same or different, or they perceive it as being highly emotional or not. And the scaling itself, if you read the book, you'll find out that I talk about how the scale is populated differs from culture to culture, not just in terms of pitch, scale step or anything, but in terms of actually what's in the scale. So if you go to a culture in which there's only 3 intervals, you're going to get a very different kind of definition of a reversal. If you go to a culture that has 24 tones per octave, you're going to get a very different kind of outcome. And Zohar certainly touched on some of that this morning. I do not want the books being read as being tied to intervals. There are some cultures that don't use 3 directions. They only use 1 or 2. So the theory was designed to be fixed. It was designed to stimulate people with respect to interactions between parameters. That was one of my main things. It's what I've continued to do to this day. The whole business about hypothesizing very carefully formalized parameters was to force people to start looking at how they interact. So if the theory has achieved that, then I'm very happy with it. I consider myself something of a scientist, and I know enough about the history of science to know that all theories come and go in one way or another, and I'm perfectly happy for parts of it to go, but I'm going to insist on pushing that you really do look at what you're doing and that you treat the theory as if it's more flexible than you might imagine. So I was going to start by saying I'm really grateful to be here. I looked at Zohar when I was home preparing this. I looked at Zohar's abstract because I know he works on parameters, and I was somewhat relieved that he wasn't going to talk about parameters. And I thought, okay, well, that'll get you off the hook. Now I find out he really did. I wish I'd had the paper before. I might have had a better response because I am going to show some parameters in my terms. So I'm really pleased to be able to present some of the revisions of the theory, and I regard theories as needing to be unified. They need to be, we've got too many theories, particularly in music. We need one that takes care of melody and texture and harmony and all the things that music's composed of. And I'm trying to do that with the same set of rules, with the kinds of flexibility that's necessary for what we know from the studies that have been done on it so far. I have also, for about the past 20 years, had a strong inkling that I was looking at the IR model when I look at paintings. Now, I may be mentally ill, but I have felt for a long time that the IR model is extensible to lots of areas, and I'll get to those, which I think you'll find at least interesting or wildly crazy, whatever. It should be fun at the end of the paper. But I want to run through some of these parameters and show you what they're like and some of the revisions of the model. And I'll try to be as economical as I can. Zohar said there was no model about registral direction or something to that effect. There is, I just never showed it before, and this is it. There's something like, as I count it, there's something like 26 parameters in music, and I have scalings for all 26 of them. There are something like 12 dimensions, which we call melody, rhythm, meter, and so forth. But there are many more parameters that feed into those. Harmony itself has something like 50 variables. I've counted them. It's why people spend so much time on harmony. It is extremely complex. One of the reasons we haven't had good theories of melody is it is also extremely complex because it's a triplex model in which every reversal also has an implication, in which every realization has a new implication. Even if it's closed, the implication goes on. It's very hard to understand that for people that want a sort of either-or condition. Music does not have those conditions. An implication that's strong, that's stopped for a few seconds by a long note, stays in the brain, and you know that because suddenly if that note picks up, you can say, oh yeah, that wasn't totally unexpected. It's what I call embodied expectation. If you're interested in that, you might read the article that I wrote for the OSU conference a few years ago. I think I've written a lot of stuff that people don't get, and I don't quite understand why that's true. But I think the climate is changing now that maybe people will start looking at some of these other things. And so basically there are these three dimensions of music. They are defined, that is, they're definable. Something either is lateral, melody that is, something is either lateral or it's not. It's either descending or ascending. And I have scaled this to show that the weakest implications are those from repeated notes. And that means those notes with weak implications are susceptible to closure more readily than notes that have very strong implications, which are more resistant to being closed. Descending implications are not as strong as ascending ones. And I did not make that clear in the book. I was unsure about it, but I certainly believe that's true now. And a lot of things that I haven't published. I have learned as I've gotten older to hold things a long time. Make sure you're really right about it. When you're a struggling assistant professor, you can't wait too long. You need to choose a topic that you can finish so you can get tenure and make money. Then you can, as someone said yesterday, then you can start doing what you really want to do. And so I've changed the parametric scale up here to reflect the fact that down is different from up. And I've put the down ones in italics, and I do that now in the analyses themselves. I point this out. I've shown this 1,000 times to many of you who come to these conferences. You've seen this before. I've made a few other little corrections. Rather than saying that things to the left are closural, I've really just said they are very weak non-closure, which means they're susceptible to closure with other parametric interference. And the same thing is true on the right. I think that's a much better take on it. I also want you to notice that that these scales all have something to do about weak affects and uniform moods. If you want to have a unified theory, it has to go all the way from psychophysics all the way up to social psychology. That is to say, it has to go all the way to learning, to emotion, and beyond. Now, the thing about reversal in process is that this looks like a dualism. It really is not. There are all kinds of things that use large intervals which are processive, and this is often overlooked. That's called retrospective process, and there are all kinds of small intervals that have reversals, and that's called retrospective reversal. So these things are not only process or only reversal. Everything can be everything else, and I think that's the point of Zohar's and Frank's message, that these things are not tied down, and the theory admits that at the very beginning. There's a lot of stuff in those books that people don't read, and I'm not quite sure why. I have a feeling It's sort of like humanists really read the prose, but they don't look at the tables and the data. And I've sat in lots of psych seminars at Penn, and nobody there reads the prose. They all look at the tables. and so if you're going to do interdisciplinary work, both sides have got to look carefully at what the other side is doing. You know, how is your prose really? Or the music theorists need to say, hey, how do you understand this data? What was the statistics here? There is, Zohar mentioned this, there's also a parametric scale for registral space or for aggregate pitch height or pitch depth. And it's parsed out in octaves, but those octaves are not set. The octave can be anywhere. That is, it can take any set of octaves. And in general, lots of melodies occur in octaves, or they go a little bit outside them or a little bit low. And as I sit there night after night listening to ads on television, I always try to figure out, do they stay within the gamut or do they go outside, and what is the effect of that, if any? My wife says, you know, I'm sitting there sort of, you know, nodding back and forth. She says, what are you doing? I say, I'm working, don't bother me. I'm thinking about these things. So there's something called aggregate pitch height, and there are lots of pieces that take aggregates of these parameters. All parameters can use the patterns and the elements that come out of them, but they also can be aggregated with other parameters. And I think Zohar was making that point. It's in the aggregation, which is where the telling points are. And the aggregate here is that Brahms takes this. I was going to play it, but it takes time to do it. So this sounds like, and it repeats over and over. And that's a case where this particular pitch height is taken down an octave each time. This is a very noticeable example. The first time I heard it, I said, well, that's the best example I've ever heard for what I'm talking about. You do not have to have repetition for this to be heard. I had another example that was from Mussorgsky that did exactly this kind of thing in which all the motives were differentiated. Now, the one thing I want to point out about this particular diagram is that the dynamic is congruent with the melody, with the aggregate part that's taken down. In other words, it moves from forte to piano, and that means it moves to closure. And this passage moves to closure because it's moving from top register to bottom registers. And bottom registers tend to be more closural. That is to say, in my new terminology, they tend to be more weakly non-closural, which means they can be converted to closure without a lot of difficulty. It's also the case that quiet things they lean toward being more closural than loud things. And so here the dynamic is congruent with the closure, which increases the closure. Now, this is a parametric scale of dynamics. I do not doubt that loudness affects things. We know it affects timbre terrifically. But it is incremental, can be heard as incrementally. I hear psychologists say all the time that we can't study dynamics because it's continuous. No, it's not continuous. In fact, the symbols show that music look at it incrementally. But these are not defined. They are done contextually. In other words, if you're playing Tchaikovsky and you're doing a triple F, you got to make sure your two Fs don't exceed that. I wish conductors would look at that. I wish they would think that not every climax in Tchaikovsky is three Fs. They tend to play it that way, or three Ps. If you're gonna use the parametric scale, you've got to pay attention to the relativity of it. So loud music tends to be very open, no matter what. And one of the reasons that the end of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony is so stunning is because it's harmonically closure over and over and over and over. Bum, 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 bum. Right? That's the way it goes. And it's like, why is that so upsetting? Why is it so emotional? And the reason is because the harmony is totally closural. It repeats over and over and over again, but the dynamic is so loud, Beethoven is saying, my music goes on way after it's finished. And indeed it does. When you walk out of the concert hall and you enter the traffic on the street, it's always a sort of bolt because you realize the music is still in your head. So you want to look at non-congruences of parameters, both as a commonality, but also as something that doesn't happen. As I said somewhere, the norm in music is non-congruence of parameters. I said that last year in Toronto when I was talking about emotion. The norm is non-congruence of parameters because that keeps music going. It is not the case that what music is about is creating closure. It just is not the case. We don't listen to it because it closes. We listen to it because it's non-congruent, because life is non-congruent. Okay, now I want to talk briefly about the melodic structures with the new analytical symbols I have, which have made a considerable difference. I remember when I first showed this to Carol Krumhansel, and she was working on it at the time, and she said, I don't really like the symbols. And I said, well, they trouble me also, but it's the best I could do at the time. And then, I don't know, about 5 years later, I was talking to Fred Laerdal, and he said, I don't really like your symbols. I thought, I need to change my symbols. When they talk, I listen. So I worked hard on them, and I'll show you I was going to show you the full set, but it's 2 pages long, and I don't have the time to do it. So I want to just show this little tune to show those of you who do not know the theory about how the symbols work. And you can see up there that when it's descending, those are done in italics. And when it's not descending, you can compare those R's, it's done in Roman. And that keeps track of up and down, and a more careful symbolization of the degree of closure and non-closure with respect to intervals. This is a silly little tune. I glopped onto this because my wife was whistling it to our grandson one day, and I thought, that's a really good example. So I immediately went and wrote it down. But she was singing it in the wrong key, and I thought, that's not the key this piece is in, I'm sure. It was like G flat or something. So I actually looked it up. I have not put the text underneath it because I want you to treat this like an instrumental piece. Text has a very strong impact on how things are grouped. It's another whole discussion. So what I want you to notice about is that the brackets show the parsing of the melody. There is nested things there on lower levels. You see it's done that way. And I haven't duplicated it over here because it's exactly the same. The P tilde means the process is not the same, but it's similar, and that stands for dee-da-da-da-da, which is seconds and thirds, so it's similar. The R0 up here, which is italicized, says that da-dee-da is a reversal, right? Small intervals, reversal, but it's 0 because it's exactly the same. In other words, it's an inversion. So that's the nature of how these work. Up there, the R with the underline says that there is some kind of repeated note there. That is a lateral pattern. So bum-bum needs to be distinguished from going up or down. I did not do that in the early part of using the symbols. And then finally, at the very end, there's a very long chain. That is, there's a bunch of symbols that are chained together. Now, let's go to what I really want to talk about. This is a paper I gave in Australia a few years ago. Carol Krumhansel was in the audience. My guess is she might have been the only person there who understood what the hell I was talking about. When I submitted my abstract to that conference, I said I was going to talk about the interaction between form and content, something that musicians do not talk about. And I got this flaming sentence back from the reviewer who said, that's all we talk about. And he didn't understand what I mean. We don't talk about form and content when we say, here's the content, it does this, it has a cadence on that note and that note and that note. And by the way, it's in this kind of form, in the story. That's not the point. The point is, what is about music that's B as opposed to A? And what makes this a really good example is that the B part is all linear and it overrides the meter in a way that Justin, I think, would be pleased about it. That is, the meter is still ticking, but it's not parsing it. That is da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You don't hear, right? You just don't hear those beats. I mean, you can imagine them, but it's not nearly as strong as the beats at the beginning. Da-da-da-da-dum, dum, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. That's a very strong meter, correct? So what you have here are reversals at higher levels in the first part. Bum, 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 bim, bum, bum, bum. That's very jumpy, that whole thing. And then over here, you have something that is totally in contrast to what you heard. That is, these are full of A's and B's up here. And that's the way I represented it in Australia. And over here, the B part is all linear. It's so unlike it. Now, just imagine if you had a B part. It's very possible to write a B part here that's full of jumpy intervals. But you'd have a very different take on what the B-ness meant. And what B always means is that the things that are differentiated get accented. That is, they become more differentiated. The things that are open become more open. The things that are closed become more closed. And if you notice here, you'll see the closure is very different at the end. There is no, I did not put the harmony up here. If you look this up, I have a book of nursery rhyme tunes that I use to play for my grandson, but I couldn't find this particular melody. The Sing a Song of Sixpence has several harmonies to it. But it's very clear when you hear this, you hear that A over there as an implied dissonance, because it's the B that really pops out as an articulated note. But it doesn't become a structural tone. That is, you don't hear as structural tones, da, dee, da, 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 dee, da, right? You don't hear that. You hear da, dee, da, 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 dee, da. Oh, wow, that was some modulation. That's why I'm not a singer. All right, so that's a major take-home point, is to think about form and process, how differentiation impacts the B-ness of something, or the differentiation of the form, versus if it were not that way. And when in Australia, I went through all the possibilities. I did a whole big graph of form and content, but I decided not to do it here because it's another one of those cases where I'm being too difficult, I guess, or something. Now, here is one of the most famous tables in the field. This is Carol Krumhansel's table of my theory. After I talked to her after she studied it, Carol actually read the book, and she actually really looked carefully at it. I always knew that it was shaped this way, but I never knew how to draw it, and she knew how to draw it. And what she's done here, which makes it so easy to understand, is that she's put the implications along with what the theory says of the realizations, along with the symbols. Now, if you just look real quickly at the symbols, you can see up here in the, I don't have a pointer, that's all right. You can look up, can you hear me if I turn my head? I guess you can, no, or not? I don't know, is there a pen?
Right here.
Oh, there it is.
Push that little.
Unfortunately, I had too much wine last night, so this may be trouble for me. You know. Well, oh, I got it. Two. I have trouble with two. One, I can. You can see up here that there's a symbol P that refers to something that changes direction. If you look over here, there's a symbol of P that maintains direction. And there are problems with this all the way through. Over here, this is the V is a symbol that changes direction, and the V over here is a symbol that continues direction. And my students found this confusing, and I told them at the time when Zohar and Bob and all my students that are here, I used to just say, go memorize it. But I actually thought, you need to do better than that. And here's Carol's graph with the new symbols, and you can see these are very, very consistent. That is, these are all R's that reverse, all of them, and these are all P's that go on the same direction. These are all P pluses, and the R plus over here is in the opposite place. The R tilde here is complemented by the P tilde here. And I love the way this worked out, because it's what I should have done in the first place. Don't ask me why I couldn't do it, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't figure it out. I want to say that this diagram of Carol's, it launched 1,000 trials. I mean, if she hadn't done this, I wouldn't be here today, frankly. This table, her original table, went all through the society, and lots and lots of people hopped onto that, and they did experiments with it. So this was a signal event for me, and her work is signal to mine, and I'm very grateful to her for the attention that I got. I also was very unhappy. Zohar mentioned this today about intervals. I used, for instance, this symbol, P plus, for something that has a differentiated leap. And it became clear to me that it's really irritating to say that this is okay, it's the same as this. Right? I mean, to say both of those are P plus, just, it really irked me. And it irked me more to do this. This was VR plus. And it's just so different from this. And those are melodies that occur in real music. So what I did was I changed everything that's greater than an octave to be 2 pluses or 3 pluses even. And the advantage of this is that I can actually now deal with this kind of music. Here's a Schoenberg piece that's got, it has all my reversals, but they're so different, they're so big, and actually the reversal itself is a very large interval. Now, people say this to me over and over. They say, well, the theory is that you have a reversal implied, and then you get a small interval that follows. That was never the case in the theory. It was always that the interval which follows is always differentiated, and if the first interval is very, very big, and the second interval, it can be differentiated, that is, it can function as a reversal, but in fact, it also has a very strong implication to be reversed again. And that's how you find those kinds of melodies that zigzag around. So I'm very happy to do this. This worked out pleasantly. Here, notice here that there is an overlapping structure here that's much more conventional. And if you want to look at Schoenberg, these motifs are alike, and you can see the analysis portrays that. This one has a lot alike, but it changes in here. And then this analysis is very conventional to normal tonal music. That is the content of this piece, and it is not that weird. It's right out of standard, Mahler type stuff. Why do we need to do this? Because all of music is not based on small intervals that we, seconds and thirds, and it's not based on intervals like sixths and sevenths. That's just crazy. It's just not that way. For a theorist, you have to write theories that have to do with the whole world of music that you know. And if you want to write theories, they've got to be applied to expressionistic music. They have to be applied to electronic music, which uses these wild intervals all the time, to dance music, electronic dance music. You have to think about these things when you do these theories. You would not want to write a theory, I contend, you would not want to write a theory that used a very small interval set. But you might write it that way in order to get your argument out. And I think adding these new symbols makes the argument much more powerful. It says, hey, don't forget about this. Don't forget about these kinds of things, because this is the music of our time. It's not the folk song I played for you. It's not the nursery rhyme tune. That's not a good representation of music, a nursery rhyme tune. Okay, how am I doing? Badly, probably. You want me to do this? I thought I'd do harmony just to show you that it's such a multiplex. But I'm going to rush right through it. This owes a lot to Carol and Fred Laerdal, and since that's been really discussed in this conference on several papers yesterday, I'm not going to go over that. I'm going to go over the IR model. There's a lot of scales that are involved in harmony. One of them, of course, is dissonance. Another one is the type of triad that's going on. These can be ranked. They've been shown to be ranked. And then there are actually types of seventh chords, as everybody knows who takes first year or maybe second year harmony. Maybe if you're lucky, you get the augmented second, in the first semester of the second year. Go figure. When these things are done in that order, they create processes. When they're done in this order and they skip one and suddenly move back, there is a reversal. It may be a strong reversal or a weak reversal. And I have an example to show you here. Let me just say that there are things like common toneness. There are things like scale step, and I'm not talking about those. This is it doesn't mean I don't care about it, right? It just means that I'm not going to talk about it here. This is the opening of the Tchaikovsky has this model. This is the opening of the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2, the first movement. I walk every day and I listen to music every day because I work all the time. So when I'm listening to music, I'm trying to find examples. I don't recommend it because if you're trying to find examples, you don't get the affect. You're always saying, how would that look? Can you deal with it? How would it play in class? That's bad business for music because actually you just want to, you go to music to experience it and love it. So this is an occupational hazard being a music theorist. This starts off with a simple F minor triad, then it goes to a major seventh. These seventh chords, these triadic seventh chords, you're told by your teachers, these are really dissonant. They're not all that dissonant. This shows up in jazz music all the time, and nobody says, well, that's really dissonant. No, not at all. Then it goes to this weird thing called the diminished minor. All of that, as it goes in those three chords, creates a process. And it's a process that is to the right, that is, it moves right, which means it's a capital letter. When you get over here to this dominant, that is this minor seventh, you're actually moving back. You're going back, and that's why there's a reversal here, and it's why it's italicized. On the other hand, this particular progression is all one thing. It's all over this pedal. Notice that this F pedal, we have to do the Bregman imperative now. If you take a harmony class, the teacher will say, and there's an F pedal here, don't worry about that. Actually, this is a very important line here. This F, it keeps being persistent, and over here it becomes accented, and then it suddenly becomes a very big part in itself that goes against this chord up here, and it moves into C minor, and you get 6, 4, 5, 1 in C. So we need to stop thinking about things as just classes of things. All right, so then you get another process from here on over. This is a moment of brightening and articulation. You feel when you get this dominant seventh, which also has two dissonances in it, but it's about as stable as you get because it mimics the overtone series. It doesn't come off as not being integrated like chordal chords are. You get this, and then it goes back to a minor seventh. That's another reversal, and then it moves to a process which reverses for a moment, and then finally it gets to this major seventh chord, and this becomes very, very dissonant down here. And so this is actually a P that's very strong, but it becomes closed down here with this C minor chord. And so therefore it's a P, but it's a P minus. And so that's how the theory deals with harmony. That is, the same symbols and the same concepts can apply to dynamics, it can apply to octaves, it can apply to melody, and it can apply to harmony. This is for those of you who teach, this is the easiest harmony example that I know because it's so static. The texture is static. All the dynamics are done here. That is, all the harmonic dynamics are done here with this voice leading. That is, there's a one-note change. Every harmony maintains 3 of the 4 pitches. Okay, so now I want to talk about the parametric scale of tempo, which moves from very slow to very fast, and actually music itself, the composition of music, has cobbled together lots of words that show how fast or how slow you are to take these things. And these tend to be more non-closural. That is, these tend to be weak non-closural. In other words, these very slow tempos tend to close if there are other things that close them. And this tends to be very non-closural over here. So if you listen to a Beethoven quartet, it's presto, it's loud and fast. It is non-closural when it ends. You say, oh, well, it's harmonically closed, but that's not the whole piece. The whole piece has to do with how the parameters interact, because that's the emotion that you get out of the piece. Okay, we'll leave that. Now, I thought I would do something completely different. This is in the vein of the interdisciplinarity of this society, but it's also trying to tell you that the IR model can be extended to other domains. Now, clearly painting is different from music, but that doesn't mean that we do not share lots of things, that music does not share lots of things with painting. Now, how can that be? Well, one thing is that painters themselves talk about that they are painting music. They're thinking about time. Another thing is that when you look at a painting, you can't just glance at it. You actually have to contemplate it. In other words, you have to study it, and that takes time to do that. And the nomenclature in painting is very similar to that in music. That is, they talk about tone, they talk about modulation, they talk about harmony. Unfortunately, they also talk about chroma, and they use chroma in a very different way than has been applied into music, because there aren't any octaves in the chroma element of painting. This is from a theorist, Munsell, who lived in the early 1900s. He was a painter and a scientist, and he began to try to do experiments which ranked all these colors. And this has like 100 years of experimental evidence behind it. It's been tested over and over. Every time it gets tested, it gets revised. There was something about 4 years ago where they adjusted the the ranking of some really dark blue. It also, this is called a tree. The tree can be extended way to the right because with things like Dalo colors, this had to do with the mixing of paint. In the middle, you see there's a core here between black, gray, and white. And up here, there is some white paint in these areas, and these are called tints. And then there's some kind of black paint over here in these blues. I have a car that looks black from about 10 feet away, and when I get up to it, I can see that it's actually blue. And that's a case of did I say tint? I didn't mean tint. That's a case of, what's the word? What's the opposite of tent? No. What? I'm blanking. Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. So this is his scheme here. It took a long time to put this together. I have the original book. Penn has the original book, which was done in colored pencil. You know, this is 1906. You can actually buy a color tree from various companies. And when I taught this stuff at Penn, that's what I did. I went out and bought and I'll tell you how I formulated this. So this is the way the theory looks. If you look at any slice that is any branch on the tree, it looks like this. And what's interesting about this is that it has very clear analogs to music. For instance, this black-white scale over here. No, I didn't mean it. How do I get rid of this? The gods are angry? Or the Jewish God is angry?
Yeah, well, it has always been.
I'll take my parameters more seriously.
I'm not the Jewish God.
Many thanks. So if you look at this, shades, that's the word I was trying to think of. Yeah, shades and tints. If you look at this, this is called the value scale, and that's the word they use to talk about this. And Munsell actually has numbers that govern how light or how dark something is. And the connection to this is actually pitch height. That is, you can think of this as a linear scale that gets up higher and higher. Why pitch height? Because we're actually going from the bottom up to the top. In other words, this is like going from very strong notes at the bottom to very weak notes at the top, namely tints. If you look over here, you have a circular hue scale. Hue refers to the color, but they don't like to use the word color because it's used all the time. The hue scale is actually on a circle. This is drawn as an oval just so it can fit the page, but this actually comes off of it as a circle, and this is the way Munsell makes his tree more understandable. Notice that this is not the circle you learned in the 4th grade. This is a circle that uses a different set, and it puts the colors on a different side. And this color, the set that he chose were the ones that I have up here in asterisks. And notice that they're not directly across one another, as you might find. But that doesn't matter. A lot of discussions of painting regarding music has to do with harmony. And I'm saying to those people, there's a lot of melody in painting. You need to look at melody. And that's sort of what, when I started the melody book, I wanted to say, can we look at something else besides harmony, please? And in the chroma scale is a little harder to understand, but you'll understand it perfectly because its musical analog here is a parametric scale of dynamics. In other words, this is about intensity toward saturation, that is toward colors that don't have any blacks or grays or anything else in them. And actually, what that means is that every time you look at a color, you're actually seeing a coordinate of 3 things. Every time. You can do this when you tie your shoes, when you watch television. While you're waiting for the train, you can look down and say, what do we got here? Well, I look down here, I see a music stand. That's black. Over next to it is brown, and brown is a derivative of orange. So this is a big skip from orange to black. These kinds of diagrams, by the way, including the circle of fifths, came about in the 18th century, and there's a whole lot of those, cones, circles, squares, you name it, they have it. I note that when Carol did her cone, it was done perfectly because the most closed part was at the bottom. The point was at the bottom. Whereas, very weirdly so, in music theory, the most important tone is put at the top, but it ought to be put at the bottom because visually that's where the tonic is, right? It's the foundation of something. It's not at the top. It's only at the top if all you want to study is tonality, you know. And it seems to me that's not all you want to study. And I make no aspersion here to Lerdahl or anybody else. I'm just saying that music theorists need to start thinking about the way in which they conceive tonality. Anyway, so you can look at every painting this way, and you can go from color to color, branch to branch, and I think I've more or less covered that. So let me show you the painting. This is a work by what the heck is his name? See, I cut so many slides out that had his name in it. Somebody here knows that. Who's the painter? You know this? You just said it to me yesterday. Yeah, that's it. Right. Ellsworth Kelly, who's a very famous minimalist. He's called the major figure of what has been named the post-painterly style. This is from MoMA in New York, from the Museum of Modern Art. This is the painting I want to discuss. You can see that it is huge. They can't even get it in this picture. Each of those stels is as large as an adult. It's also very high, and I'm not going to talk much about the shape of this, but that shape has, even though it's a rectangle, that shape has a big impact on you, because when you go to look at that painting, it's up above you as if to say, you know, I am over you, I govern you, and you get that feeling. Now, if you think that's not true, imagine what this painting would look like if all those colors were circles, little tiny circles. It would be an entirely different painting. Suppose they were shaped like a moon. Suppose they were shaped like blobs. It would be very different. When you shape it like a rectangle with very strong edges, he's making a very powerful statement. And the IR model will actually analyze any kind of form, that is, any kind of visual form. You actually can attach P's and R's to it and find out what the structural tones are. So I just wanted to show you that so you know what we're dealing with. This is a smaller version that's in the same museum. I downloaded both of these. I've analyzed these kinds of paintings a lot. This is a smaller version. It's actually 9 by 9, which is not small. So Ellsworth Kelly is very famous for these sorts of paintings. And it's actually, there is no story to this. The paint is very flat. It's purely abstract. And by the way, it's very popular. So I came here on Friday because I wanted to go to both art museums. I've been to them before, but I wanted to do it again. And I noticed that at the Beaux-Arts, they have a whole room devoted to people that do these kind of paintings. They must have 10 or 12 of these kind of paintings. So this was not a passing fancy, these kinds of paintings. And then when I went down to the Contemporary Art Museum on Saturday to sort of get involved with the buskers, I went to the art museum. They had a whole bunch of these paintings there too. Not all by Ellsworth Kelly, but by Canadians that did these kinds of paintings. And I looked at them and I thought, you know, my theory will take care of analyzing every one of these things. I could do it by eye as I sat there and watched. Just to have a little overview here, you can see that there are yellows. There's a yellow of return. This yellow over here is actually a return of that one. You can see that in the middle, these greens become, the difference between these greens is much more subtle. When you get to this is not bad, you know, for a photograph. You see that this blue is much, much darker, and then you get to a very dark purple. So this painting moves on both sides to light toward this dark purple here in the middle. These blues, by the way, are called purple blues because they have a lot of blue in them. And then you start to move out to a red color. And these are all red colors of increasing brightness. That is, they have more light in them, more white paint in them. And then when you finally move over here, you get to a kind of orange, and most people call this yellow-red. For the French, as I understand it, the French have no word for orange. Am I right about that? Anybody know that? That's what I've read. There are also lots of cultures that don't have a word pink. Am I wrong? Okay, there I'm wrong. Is it pink they don't have? Is it pink they don't have? All right, I'm misinformed. I'm reading the wrongs. I'm not an authority on language. Now I want to show you. I'm going to show you the IR model analysis of this, and you can see that chroma is analyzed by the size of the step. I taught this to my undergraduates, by the way. They would spend a half semester doing this kind of stuff, going out and looking at paintings. I used to take them to the museums in Philadelphia like a docent and talk to them about paintings, about the color sequences in paintings. And it was very strange because I had my 7 or 8 students, and I kept noticing people are gathering around me like, I'm an official employee of the art museum. I kept saying, go away, this is all theoretical. Don't listen to me, I don't know the difference between pink and orange, right? So anyway, I had my students think of these paintings as music, and this is a staff of 5 lines, and the advantage of that, and I think it's cognitive, is that Munsell himself this goes up in 2s to the very top. So music notation is pretty much like that. That is, if you go all the way up the staff, you get 8 tones or 10 tones, right? And we're very amenable to those kinds of numbers. You'll notice that the yellows are at the top. They are the brightest colors. Notice that this at the end is at a higher level. And you can see the number down here that reflects that. This is a 10. This is a 5. It's the second number. You see it's half as bright. This is also, that's a 6. I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong number. That's a 6. This is a 5. It goes down. This is a 4. It's even lower. You can see that that's shown by the smallness of these letters. If you look up here, you have to read these paintings not only from left to right, but also from right to left. I did that backwards. Because in order to scan it, you're doing it this way. The spaces in the middle show you what happens on the color circle over here. That is, when you go from green-yellow to purple-blue, you're making a really big skip here. And this would be, in my terms, implicative of a reversal, or a P plus if there's something before it. Then there's a couple of spaces here, which you can notice over here on the right side, that you've actually skipped purple-red here to get from red, is that a P, purple? Yeah, you get from purple to red. And this is the way you calculate things in terms of hue. And this is the way you calculate things in terms of brightness. You can look at these, you see that I converted all these chroma steps into points. And this was like, people talk about music as a 2-dimensional graph. It's actually a 3-dimensional graph because large notes are bigger, half notes are smaller, and grace notes are really small. But there the analogy ends because these big notes are actually more open because they're what? More saturated. These are more dramatic. And so that's the view of this picture, and you can see that it has a process which goes down here to a reversal, and then it goes to a P plus as it goes to this purple blue. It has a reversal in the middle that goes from purple blue to purple blue back to purple, and this is an R tilde that involves a repetition, and then you can see there's this one long P at the end. That is, this is all one fell swoop all the way up. Well, should that remind you of what you just saw in music? We saw in some of the examples, the folk song, that it was very chunked over here to the left and very much a process on the right. And so I'm wondering about how content and form, I wonder how common these things are. I was really happy with this analysis. Here's the picture again. Oops. I'm hitting the wrong, sorry, I hit the wrong page. I'm still doing it. Here it is again. And you see, you can look at this. You can say, oh, okay, there's a skip here. Then it gets really dark. So there's a big skip here. That is, to move from these greens to these really dark ones is a big deal. And then you see down here, this is murky, and suddenly it brightens. Just like the Tchaikovsky, it begins to go back up, and indeed it ends way back up here. And that's exactly what this analysis shows, right? It also shows the skips and so on. I don't want to go into the nomenclature over here because it's complicated. That is the difference between hue, value, and chroma. But if you look at it, the second letter is chroma. And if you look in the middle, you can see that 5, the letter 4, is very common here. You see what I mean? 4 is here, 4 is there, 4 is there, that goes to that one. 4 is here, 4 is here, 4 is there. That's this note over here, 4 is there, that's the note over here, 4 is here. And you notice that in the amount of light, but what you don't notice is that chroma is really changing here in the middle. It's that amount of congruence which gives this painting power. And I also just these seem silly to me. What are they? They're just a bunch of bars. And I got to looking at them, and I thought, these things are really interesting. You can contemplate these a long time. All right, how am I? Am I screwed yet? Okay, let me close. I shouldn't say those kinds of things. I know I shouldn't. My wife tells me to clean up my language. Now I want to just show that the theory can apply to faces. I was going to do this today. When I watch movies, I look at faces, and I'm always looking for good examples. And you can see the camera on somebody in which the woman is hugging a man, and she suddenly realizes while he's hugging her that he's the murderer of her mother or something, right? He's saying, "Oh, I love you so much," and she's smiling. And then he says, "But I have to go out," and then she sort of turns plain. And then he says something like, "I have some things in the car I have to clean up." And she suddenly realizes, "Oh my God!" And so you get these kinds of facial expressions. I was going to bring them in. It takes a lot of time to do those film clips. It's also totally illegal. But we do it. This is for Frank Russo. I had him in mind when I did this, but you can see that you can move from happy to neutral from sad to neutral to happy. What is that but a P tilde? You can move down the opposite way, happy, neutral, sad. That's a P tilde, but it's down, right? That's why you get the italic there. You can get an R minus where you go happy, sad, neutral. So the R minus is on neutral. You can get an R0 where you get neutral, sad, neutral. In other words, these two outside things are exactly alike. You can get a much stronger R0, that is one that's not retrospective, but you can get this one, which is really happy, really sad, really happy. That's an R0 because you come back to exactly what you were. It's exactly like music. And then you can get an R minus, which is sad, happy, and neutral again. This is R minus down, right? And therefore it's in italics. I'm very interested in doing this kind of thing. I'll tell you another story in a minute. Here's a tone. This is the opening tone. It has a dynamic process that's attached to it. How do we explain tones? They're much more interesting than we think. And let me show you some tones. These are tones from Schultz's article that just came out in Music Perception, in which he's complaining about the kinds of stimuli that are used for experiments. And I've analyzed these. You can see that the IR model shows why these are really boring because they're simply inversions of one another. These are tones that have been polished up in order to be controlled, right? And he is saying that we need to do things that are more ecologically friendly. And if you want to wonder about the difference, this is an oboe tone. And here's the analysis of the oboe tone. This is really complicated, right? This theory will analyze any curve. And so here's a curve I just made up. I tried to make up something really difficult, and here's the theoretical analysis of it. Now, I won't do these because those have to do with shapes. I want to point out to all of you who are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? I want to point out that I'm not interested in comparing things that are non-comparable. What I'm interested in is preparing how we perceive this world. And these two things are a lot alike. This is a spectrographic clip of a piano tone, and this is the part of the Picket Post Mountain, which is about 3 miles wide. They look the same. They have the same kind of shape. These things are not alike, right? What I really want to get you to understand is that I'm not just interested in looking at similarities across the world. I'm interested in seeing what we use to parse it. Now, this is a symbol that I used, P+, and what I want you to note about it is that part of it has to do with a cognitive representation, that is the P part. The italics have to do with the perceptual part. We perceive whether something is up or down. The closed parentheses point to a cognitive perspective of the realization. That is, this is a prospective, retrospective realization. The plus sign also perceptually indicates that the second interval is different. There's an A-B comparison here. The plus sign perceptually signifies that the second interval is a partial surprise. That's the aesthetic part of the theory. The open initial parentheses refers to the perceptual side. So if you deduct the whole perceptual side of this, here's what you get. We come back to our melody, and actually what I've done here is I've done a purely perceptual analysis of this melody. This is pure bottom up, and I've taken away all the P's and R's because those are all conceptual. You can take any piece of melody and you can analyze it with just these symbols. And here's what they are. There's an initialize, there's a similarity, there's a down, there's down reversal, there's up, there's down large, there's zero. There are only 8 functions. You can analyze the entire world with those 8 functions. I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying. I hate to say that that's what I'm saying, but that's what I'm saying. I think look at this. This is all similarity, either up or either down. Now, I think I'm probably a little crazy because what I do is I walk around the house all day. I'm looking at these symbols. As I look at the sink, it's an oval, and I see that it has no closure. As I look at the base it's on, I'm saying, well, this is visual process. This is a visual duplication. That's a visual process. I do this all day long. Everywhere I go, I think about it. As I sit in my hotel room, I'm thinking, is there anything in here that's not these symbols? And I can't find them. I'm sure they're out there. But I'm telling people in psychology, start thinking about looking at your phenomena this way, and then you can avoid cognition altogether. Okay, I don't want to avoid cognition altogether. What is cognition then, if it's not necessary to perception? What cognition is, it seems to me, on the basis of what I'm talking about here, and this is a big thing because it's important people like me speculate because I'm retired and you're not going to fire me and I'm not going to make any more money and so forth. It's important to speculate. What cognition is it's a domain identifier. The thing it does for us is it carves out the domains of life so that your perceptual processing of it knows that this is not the same. It knows the mountain and the spectrogram are not the same, even though they have the same small signals. That's my killer moment? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me just stop at that. I take my work where it leads me. It fascinates me. I am hooked on it in ways I think about it all the time. My wife and I watch movies, and she knows that I'm scribbling down stuff on the paper, and she says, "What are you doing? This is a really good movie." I said, "I just want to get this idea down because I think it's pretty interesting." I stopped drinking at night because I used to think I was having really good ideas, and then this is awful. So I don't do that anymore. I don't have time for the questions. I appreciate the extra time. Is that it? I have one last slide. And here's the last slide. I want to thank the board of SMPC, the scientific committee, obviously all these people, but particularly Lola, Stephen, Davey, and Lex. I can't imagine I can't imagine it because I've done these conferences. You can't imagine it until you've done it, what Stephen has had to go through for the past 2 years. I want to thank Lex twice because he just co-edited a festschrift on my behalf, which you can see out there. I don't get any money from it, but if you want to buy it, it's okay with me. There's some really great articles in. And I want to thank Lex for organizing this session and for his wonderful comments. I never knew I was scary, but I think my children probably thought that too. I want to thank Justin because he came back from a sabbatical on the continent. Fortunately, he hasn't seen his wife for a month, so I think he probably wanted to come back, but then he's going back to the continent because he wants a tax break. I want to thank Zohar, who flew all the way from Israel, if you can believe, and that's not a small trip. I want to thank Frank because I saw Frank at the conference last year right after I gave my emotion paper, and Frank came up to me, or I guess it was before, and he said, "What do you want me to do for this? I don't know what to do." And I said, "Just do anything you want. I'm grateful for you doing it." I am grateful, Frank. I did give you those faces, right? And then I want to thank Bob, who's upcoming, and I know he's going to do a splendid job. So thank you all very much for your attention.